The local groups represented at the Wilma tonight are Indian People's Action, AWAM, the Buffalo Field Campaign, the Green Party, and WHEEL. Since I know a lot about WHEEL, I'll tell you a little bit of what I know. I'll try and keep it concise. Working for Equality and Economic Liberation started in 1996 in response to the federal welfare reform bill that was passed. That bill has to be reauthorized next year in Congress. There's a big fight over this really small pot of money. It's $16.5 billion for the entire national welfare program that gets spread out across the states. When we were having dinner tonight, I was talking a little bit about how interesting it is that Congress just in a flash gave $15 billion to the airline industry to bail them out. That's called corporate welfare. We're arguing for our, to help people in our own communities, over $16.5 billion. My life for 2 years has been dedicated to this campaign to raise awareness around poverty in our communities and make sure that this bill gets reauthorized. It's amazing to me to realize, to take a step back and to look at that. $15 billion to the airline industry, and we're having trouble reauthorizing 16.5 for our poor folks in our country. Again, a great way to take action. If you're incensed, go out into the lobby. I want to recognize the other groups that are supporting this event, though. The University of Montana Native American Studies Department, Indian People's Action, Glacial Lake Missoula Greens, Buffalo Field Campaign, Multicultural Alliance, Cold Mountain Rivers, Arley High School Indian Club, Flathead Reservation Human Rights Network, the National Coalition Building Institute, Northern Rockies Earth First, Seeds of Peace, ASUM, the Associated Students of the University of Montana, Women's Voices for the Earth, Women's Opportunity and Resource Development, Native Forest Network, ASUM Chapter of the Missoula Greens, Fact and Fiction, Rock Creek Alliance, and Women's Center, YWCA Multicultural Program, and AWAM. Now it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce Janet Robidoux. We have a great statewide coalition that's working on anti-poverty work here in Montana, and Janet's one of my favorite people to work with because she's really smart and very insightful, but she's really funny. And when you do really serious work like we do, it's really nice to have people that are funny. Here she comes.
Good evening, everyone. I am Janet Robidoux, and I'm the project director for Indian People's Action, and I'm not short. A funny thought. And the newly appointed co-director of Montana People's Action, which is a statewide grassroots membership-based organization of low to moderate income Montanans. This is the first time a Native American, a person of color, is heading this organization, and I can tell you I'm pretty darn proud about that. So I want you to know that I'm under a great deal of pressure because Tony said earlier that Winona said that we needed a funny Indian. And then Kate said, well, she said, how shall I introduce you? And I said, well, you know everything there is to know about me. And she said, well, I'm going to tell them you're funny. And the pressure's just too much. I don't have any funny thoughts. So with that, I just want to say quickly that Indian People's Action is a project of Montana People's Action. It formed in 1997. It is comprised of those of us that live in the urban cities of Montana, and a lot of times what happens is that when we leave home, we leave our families and our friends, and but we keep those ties. Maintaining those ties with the homelands is important. However, we move to the cities to go to school, to work, to have better opportunity to things. And when we get to the cities, people don't know much about us as Indian people. And a lot of times they used to come up to me and they'd say, oh, Janet, I really support sovereignty. And I really support land and water rights. And I'd say, that's great. But where do you stand on the issues of education? Why are we building more prisons than schools? What about affordable health care? What about affordable housing? They said, oh, I didn't think you thought about that stuff. Well, we do. We think about that stuff. And a lot of what we deal with Indian Peoples Action is the institutional racism. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about racists running around in white sheets and burning crosses. I'm talking about systems that are set up to make it so that people cannot make it through them, and discriminate against people either for the color of our skin or because we don't have as much money in our pockets as other people do. And so we at Indian Peoples Action and Montana Peoples Action fight for the right to have our voice at the table. And frankly, you know, it's a lot of fun standing up for our rights, because a lot of times our folks don't have the means to do that. And I can stand up here all by myself and everybody's like, Janet who? But when I stand with an organization behind me, like the Indigenous Women's Network or Honor the Earth, then that means something. And I just wanted to thank Winona for coming out here and working with us with the Honor the Earth concert. I don't know how many of you were able to get to the Bonnie Raitt Indigo Girls concert, but it really raked it in. And just for Winona's benefit, I want you to know that we worked with WHEEL and another organization called WORD and MPA and Indian Peoples Action, forming a group called MISC. You know, MPA, IPA, WEEL, we just like, you know, we never say the whole thing. We just like lots of letters. And I think it's fun because it keeps y'all guessing, you know, what's she talking about now? But with the voter registration and the work that we did, we raised the voter participation and turnout anywhere from 9 to 22% in the 5 cities in which we work. So I just want to say that Pamela Kingfisher was born and raised in the shadow and secrecy of nuclear power and bomb building. Pam became an activist at a young age by asking questions. Her father worked at Hanford, where they made plutonium for the atomic bomb in Washington State for 30 years, and her brother will be retiring this year from his 30 years. In 1975, she returned with her 2-year-old son to her grandmother's land in Oklahoma. There she worked for the Indian Health Service for 17 years, receiving an award for outstanding performance from the Surgeon General of the United States. As former board president and community organizer of Native Americans for a Clean Environment in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, hope I said that right, Pam was instrumental in keeping the health of the people at the forefront of their environmental battle. The closure of the notoriously contaminated Kerr-McGee plant stopped the production of 23% of the world's uranium supply. Native Americans for a Clean Environment 7-point strategy and ferocious pursuit of the truth captured a great win for Indian country and the nuclear abolitionist community worldwide. Ms. Kingfisher is currently the executive director of the Indigenous Women's Network here in Austin, Texas. Actually, this is Missoula, in case you don't know. They own and operate Alma de Mesure Learning and Retreat Center near Lake Travis, and published the magazine Indigenous Women. Please join me in welcoming Pamela Kingfisher.
Wow. I'm pretty overwhelmed. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm short. Sometimes I'm funny, too. It is really overwhelming to come up, especially this week in light of the things that have happened in the last week, the time of grief that our country is in. Earlier this week, I thought, geez, we're going up to ask for money. You know, we're sending off our little checks, and everyone else is giving their money and sending it to the firefighters and their families and the people in New York City. How can I go to Montana and ask for money? But in the last couple days, through all the things that I've read, all the amazing emails that I've received, people who are so articulate and can speak, say these beautiful things. I couldn't string 3 words together a couple days ago still. It just is overwhelming. But that inspired me too, because I realized how important it is that the friends and allies of peace come together. And I think that's what's so important about each and every one of you coming out tonight. It is very overwhelming. I'm so honored, and I really appreciate all of your interest. I know you're here to hear Winona, who can really talk to us on these issues, and I'm just proud to be tagging along and opening up for her, my boss, at the Indigenous Women's Network. She probably cringes every time I say that, but I'm proud of that, and I think that it's something not everybody always knows. Winona wears a lot of hats, and one of those hats was to be the founding mother and a board mother with a lot of other courageous warrior women of the Indigenous Women's Network. As you heard in my opening bio, I kind of came up as a daughter of plutonium, asking a lot of questions. I didn't do well in school. I got A's and F's. I didn't do math and science. It just wasn't my thing. And I learned the Indigenous way, the hands-on. You know, I have to ask a lot of questions and go through it myself and touch it and feel it and think about it. So by 4th grade, I was asking all the wrong questions in my family and kind of became the black sheep. But I was also the only Indian in my family. My mother's mother died when she was 2, and her father was killed when she was 12. So she was raised in the boarding schools. The Indian boarding schools in Oklahoma weren't quite as abusive and horrible as the ones north in South Dakota and up in these regions, but we still saw, you know, a lot of tragedy come out of those schools. But my mother felt like that was her home, and she embraced it and learned and loved living there. So the rest of the family was raised in a time when she was nervous about being the only Indian in a white community in Washington State, far, far from her family and her people. She had already lost her language and most of her culture, and so it was really pushed upon all of us to be normal. You know, why do you want to know about that stuff? When I started asking questions about, what does it mean that I'm Cherokee? What does it mean that we're Indian, Mama? You know, she's like, oh, go be normal. Why do you want to know all that? Don't bug me, sort of stuff. And luckily, I was the last of 5 children, and I think she was sort of over it. You know, she was like 40 by the time she had me, and I kind of got to be raised out in the barn by the animals and be a little bit more natural. And I think those instincts, that DNA had a chance to really cook, and it worked. So eventually she was able to start talking to me more and come to Oklahoma when I'd gone back to my grandma's Indian land. We have the deed from the government at 50 cents an acre, you know, is what they priced that land at. In Oklahoma, we don't have reservations. Everyone got a piece of land. The Allotment Act really took over Indian territory, and then they opened it up for the settlers to come in, you know, the land rush, the famous Sooners, you know, that beat them in the night before. So that's kind of the history of my life, and going back home to meet my people. And I don't have my language. I have some of my culture, but it's because I was fierce and struggled and asked questions and sought that out. So I've, you know, been one of those, never knew what I was going to be when I grew up, didn't go to college until I was 42 years old. But by the time I was 30, I knew everything I never wanted to know about uranium and plutonium, and really was able to translate technical information into plain English. And you don't have to have a lot of alphabets after your name to say, you know, it's really dangerous, you don't want it, stop. It's pretty simple. In Oklahoma, we started suing Kerr-McGee and the EPA in 1984, and we sued them for 10 years. We sued the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We charged the EPA with child abuse. We did everything, every creative, crazy, desperate thing we could. We really never thought we would beat that monster. It was, you know, we just never planned for that day. It's not something that you have the contingency plan for, oh, what do we do if we win? Nobody had ever really won. You know, shutting down Seabrook was about the only thing that had happened nuclear-wise as a step backwards. So we never really thought about that, but we fought for it desperately and continuously and viciously. Bullet holes in the windows and things like that at the office, but we always thought of Karen Silkwood, and we always felt her at our meetings. I don't know if you know Holly Near, but she wrote a great song, "I'm doing the work for you, I'm doing the work for two, Karen." And I always think of that, especially now in IWN, because we have lost many warrior women already, and we have to carry on their work too. So in about 1992, I just started feeling really emptied by being so against something all the time, 24 hours a day. Every conversation you had with people ended up being centered around that. When I was at the Indian Health Service, I developed the first tumor registries there so that we actually followed up people who had positive cancers. Before that, the Indian Health Service just said, "Oh yeah, you're really bad, you need to come back," and they didn't pursue that or learn how to explain it in your language or, you know, bring in people who could talk to you about your issues. So that was real important to me, that people who were, you know, in the really dangerous health situations had follow-up and had care. And it just kind of looked like nobody cared. So I also developed pap smear registries to make sure that we brought women back in on abnormal pap smears. And then I learned how to develop medical libraries and did that for the 5 hospitals in the state of Oklahoma, the Indian Health Service hospitals. And this is all without a college education, so I guess by the time I was 40, I had to say, well, you know, maybe you're not as stupid as your brothers always told you you were. But it took a while. So that was something I wanted to share this morning with the kids up at Arley High School. We talked with them today, and which was real fun, except it was early out Friday, and they were ready. So at that point in '92, I just started thinking about, you know, what are we going to do? This plant might shut down and they might go away in the middle of the night. What are we going to do for this community? How can we stop being so all the time? You know, it's like you go home at night and you're not very nice to your family, and those are the people nearest and dearest to you. And I just realized that fight or flight that you get into, where you're on adrenaline all the time, coffee, late nights, conference calls, you get sort of rabid about it all, and really. And you get tired, and you see a lot of burnout, and you see great folks that have worked so hard just burn out and fall to the wayside, and it's really heartbreaking because we all need to continue these important battles. And I especially felt that at the nuclear end of things. So I started looking around at sustainable issues. What do I believe in? Because I really had strong beliefs. I had a lot of ideas, and I'd done a lot of research, and started thinking about what would we offer this community. We're always saying, don't take this, don't do that, but what do we offer them as a positive? And I think it was an important turning point for myself, for our organization, but more so at a national level. I think other people were coming to that same place at the same time. And that's the synchronicity that is the beauty of the energy that moves between all of us, no matter what race, sex, poverty level we are. That runs through us. So I really started looking at that and believing that we needed to start working on it. It was up to us. If we were going to be the ones to stop the plant or stop the contamination, then we also had to be there to rebuild with positive, sustainable solutions. A year later, that plant was shut down. We still weren't ready, and we did a fairly poor response to the community. I mean, I felt like we should have been working for years at that option level, and we really hadn't, because the fight was so hard, and sometimes it was just 2 or 3 of us, and sometimes it was 30 or 40. Sometimes it was 150 if we paid enough prizes at the powwow. You know, but it would come and go through the years, and a 10-year legal battle is a long battle, and who likes lawyers and all that jargon, you know? It was hard to keep up with, but I made sure we had a monthly meeting in the community every month for 3 years. So at our monthly community meeting in November of '94, we had the workers, workers' union representatives come down from the Fernald plant in Ohio, where it's another step of processing in the nuclear fuel cycle. And they were talking to the workers at Kerr-McGee at the General Atomics Sequoia Fuels facility. Kerr-McGee had by then sold all their atomic holdings and moved to Australia, where they're now mining uranium on the Aboriginal peoples there in Australia. And General Atomics had taken it over. The Blues Brothers out of Boulder. Was that fun? We had a big time with that. And they wanted to become the new, big man on campus around nuclear issues. So they had bought Kerr-McGee's, a lot of their holdings. We had them there talking because those workers had filed suit against the DOE, and they had won. And they'd won big money. And they were learning how to deal with that money. And so we brought them in to talk to our workers. And that's something we never did. We never leafleted, we never protested at the plant. We took medicine people to the plant. We cared about the workers and their health and their families and that community. And I think that's the difference in Native organizations and Native organizing that is going to be something we can share with the world. That we understand that environmental connection to all people and all animals and beings in the water, the air, and especially the land. And that's the key point. When she said the 7-point strategy, for about 6 or 7 years, we were going along going, yeah, we need some media, we need to do this, we need, these other players at the table. And we finally realized that we needed 7 points because that's a spiritual number for us. And the one point that we didn't have was the spirituality. So we made sure we had elders on our board and that our meetings were opened with prayers and that we went and blessed the land that was so contaminated by the cadmium and arsenic and flowing towards the Arkansas River. So that was important to us, to not make it them and us. It just couldn't be that way. The communities were too small, really small rural area. So that night we were having this meeting, and we were so happy because so many more workers were starting to come. We were starting to get more middle of the night phone calls. You guys were right. You ought to see what they're doing now. Get down here. The time they left these contract workers standing up to their waist in yellow water, which was so full of uranium, like 2,000 times the acceptable level. They were dipping the skull out of their back pockets, which had been soaked with that uranium water. They're starting to see cancers in their mouths. These guys were just contractors who were immediately gone and had no recourse for health care or anything else. So they were starting to finally believe us, but it had taken that whole 10-year legal battle, the last dregs of the hippie movement, all those things they called us, and that we were just against everything. But we did enough press that we got into houses that would never have allowed us in the door. So that night, a man came running in from the plant and said, they've shut it down, we're all fired. 325 people that night, 325 families lost that income, and they were devastated. They were just knocked to their knees. And so at that point, things really changed. And I knew that my instincts had been right, and that we did need to be ready. If we're gonna fight against something, you better know what you believe in, and you better be standing up for it every day. Because if you do win, and even if you don't, that's the way to win, is to show the alternatives and really make it clear why it's so important. I wrote some notes, but at this point I can't see them, and who knows what I was going to say, but I just wanted to tell you all some of that as my history. And coming into the Indigenous Women's Network just 2 years ago was a very sad time for us. We had just lost Marcia Gomez. There's some magazines up front in the lobby and some t-shirts that will have sort of a statue of a woman holding the globe in her lap. And that's the Madre del Mundo that Marcia Gomez created. And she was a great activist and warrior woman and crazy wild thing who laughed real loud and was always flying around with her hair wild and just doing a million things, had so many friends and allies, and was so busy. And really taught us a lot. She was a mixed blood, mestizo, Anglo, Choctaw, and Latino Mexican woman, and embraced all of those fully. She told us, when we were having the argument about Indigenous and Indian and what words do we use, and we really had to accept our sisters of the South and not recognize that artificial border and realized that those Indigenous people were probably our sisters and cousins always, and recognized that those fences and borders that have been drawn are not ours, and they do not belong to this Turtle Island. She was murdered horribly in the fall of '98. And we lost our institutional memory at Alma de Mujer, which means soul of woman. It's a 22-acre retreat and learning center that was gifted to us in 1995 by a wealthy Anglo oil heiress in Texas. She wanted the land to always be kept in communal hands, and she felt like Native women would do that. So we were very pleased and honored to accept that gift, especially with Marcia at the head. We knew that she would make it happen because she was that kind of girl. So it was a very sad time, but 6 months later, we also lost another founding mother, Ingrid Washenawatake Alisa, who was the first Native woman to be the head of a philanthropic organization in New York City, the Fund of the Four Directions. She was working with the Uwa tribe in Colombia to look at language schools and to bring back their language. She had really gotten captured by language and its importance to our cultures. And she went there with 2 other activists to meet with the Uwa people. These are the people who stood up against Occidental Petroleum and said, we will commit mass tribal suicide if you drill on our lands here. This last week, Occidental has given up because all their drilling holes have come up empty. That's one victory. But they're still spraying the crops, they're just killing the children down there, and it's all our money, it's all our ammunition, and we're going in a bigger way. So really, just keep your eye on Colombia. If you're going to write letters and email, please watch that issue. It's very important to us because of the blood of our sister that's there on that land. They were ripped out of the taxi cab and marched through the jungle for 9 days and murdered on the Venezuela border in a horrible, cruel way. This was one of the most incredible women I've ever met, who laughed louder than Marcia, was crazier, told wilder jokes, and had more fun, and ate more, and lived big, and shared that with everyone she came in contact with. Just an amazing woman, a warrior woman, a sister, a friend. I was asked to come onto the board of the Indigenous Women's Network after the loss of Marcia and Ingrid. And that was a great honor, but again, just how do I fill that void? And, you know, how can any of us struggle to maintain what just those 2 women did? And those are just 2 women of the many Native women that we know who are brave-hearted women, who are standing the line for the environment, for language, for culture, for education, for welfare support, for poor people. Just all of those issues that we face on the reservations, in urban communities, and throughout America where we're scattered. So it was daunting, but I was very happy to come into the inner circle and become a part of that process of building leadership among Native women. It wasn't long before I was down at Alma de Mujer and felt really pulled to the land. I had lived on my land in Oklahoma in a tent for 6 months as we built a house, a geodesic dome. We lived without electricity for 7 years. We, were really growing the food. I boiled the diapers and milked the goat for the baby and, the whole thing. So that land down there just really talked to me and pulled me in. And I realized that we needed to put a lot of energy into it. It takes a lot of money to run it. The big boys won't come see us. We don't allow alcohol or drugs, and they had to sleep in the same room together, so, it's not quite the corporate thing to do. But the peace and social justice folks come, the meditators, the yoga people like that come into Alma de Mujer, and these were the network of people that Marcia created there. So a year and a half ago, I moved to Texas. Austin, Texas. The belly of the beast, and watched all that go down with George W.'s campaign, and it was a painful process, let me tell you. The best part was Winona running, being able to have that in my heart. And there's a real strong Greens connection in Austin. It's real funny because everyone told me, if you're going to Texas, hey, Austin's the place to be. That's the town to live in if you're going to be in Texas. Well, thank God. So it's like the only Democratic county in Texas or something, I don't know. But it's a hotbed of activity, and there's a big green movement down there. So they love Winona and Ralph Nader to come in, and there's a big support there. So that's good. I feel like there's a little of my community there. There are some natives in Texas, but it's a little rough for them, and Bush and his predecessors have never been very good to the tribes in Texas. There's just 3 small tribes there. So it wasn't long, I guess about 6 months before the network, the board of directors, asked me to take on the full directorship of IWN. And at that point, I was happy to do so because I really saw what we needed to do to raise more money, to bring in the capital, and make sure that we could continue to operate and expand back out and build the work of these 2 women that we'd lost. Auntie Arlene Logan was an elder we had also lost. So we've really faced this in the last few years. IWN was started in 1985. And that makes us 15 years old this year. But we started really slow, as most Indians do, and didn't have a director for about the first 9 years. It was a very loose network of women doing the work in their communities. People like Winona, Ingrid, Neelok Butler, just amazing women all over the country. We just had another gathering in Mohawk this June, and Mililani Trask, the head of the sovereign Hawaiian nation in Hawaii, and just a beautiful spirit, was there telling the story of how IWN became out of the Northwest Indian Women's Circle. And she'd come to that first meeting, and it was their first talking circle, and they were going around telling their stories. So the Hawaiians have, you know, almost a worse story than Native Americans, if you can imagine. And they are still wards of the state, so they're quite a few steps behind us. And she was telling the story, and her Hawaiian sisters were crying, and she said, oh, it was a Kodak moment. I had my Kleenex, and we're really sharing, and all these beautiful Native women around me, and pretty soon this crotchety old voice in the back said, you better stop your crying. You better dry those tears. You're crying the tears of your mother. You're crying the tears of your grandmother. You want to build your nation? You better stop crying and build your nation. You've been waiting for Washington to do it. You've been waiting for the men to do it. You better dry your tears and build your nation. Mililani said, they just kind of looked at each other, and they stopped crying and said, we better build our nation. We better stop crying. And another elder woman came up to them and said, if the rest of your people have this same sadness in their heart that you have, then they're ready too. And if you go home and organize, they'll help you. And so she did. And within 2 years, they were really moving towards building this sovereign nation. And I just love that story because I just think that's so important that we hear from those elders that can tell us and look with that discerning eye, and they've passed that point, little midlife, but we do a lot of crying, so they can tell us to dry those tears and get on with the business. So to hear Mililani tell this story and to see what she's done, you know, it's just so inspiring and gives me so much hope. Someone interviewing me for this trip up here said, do you ever get a little down? I said, well, you know, not since the depths of the nuclear beast that we were combating, because since then, I've traveled Indian country. I've gone to a lot of reservations. I've interviewed a lot of projects out there, 10-year-old nonprofits that are doing amazing things, and it just all gives me hope. The language schools at Blackfeet, the Pagan Institute up at Blackfeet, teaching only in the Blackfeet language, and the Mohawks at Akwesasne. The Akwesasne Freedom School is even older than Pagan, and they're teaching only in the Mohawk language. And now they're teaching like their second generation. And it's just amazing the things that are going on out there to revive the culture and to really heal from this post-colonial stress disorder that's been passed on through the generations in Native communities. Seriously. Yep. I mean, it's really serious. And we see it every day. The report that just came out this last spring on violence and the Native statistics in that violence report are horrifying. So as the rest of the country is getting ready to smoke them out of their hole and drain the swamp and get them dead or alive, talking about how this land has never seen this sort of bloodshed, you know, I just have to grieve in my heart for those families and those people. But as a Native, I have to say, you have really short memories, guys, you know, because this land has seen war. And it's still going on. And that's the saddest part. And that's why I'm happy to be here tonight asking you for your support, because it is still raging. It is a quiet war. We know what those words mean. A stealth war. We know what that feels like. I feel for the Afghani women. If any of you get a chance to see the video under the veil or behind the veil, it's incredible. An Afghani woman goes in with a camera and you will not believe how those women are treated. I mean, the men and everyone else have it pretty bad too, but the women are on the low rung there. And I grieve, but I really hope that we can have a better memory about who we are as a country. As Native Americans, we never chose to be Americans, but we have accepted that. And we opened our arms. And we aren't terrorists. Sometimes we feel like it, but we're not terrorists. So we need to remember that these issues are still here and will continue to carry on as the corporate welfare and the blank war checks are being written as we speak. It's going to be harder and harder to raise money for peace, social justice, Native Americans, women, poverty, the environment. I read in the New York Times today about the foundations who are putting $3 million, $5 million, immediately writing the checks. And that warms my heart and it fills my heart, but it also tells me that as the director of a nonprofit, I'm going to have a really hard year. As will all the other nonprofits and peace and social justice people like yourselves. So it's more important now than ever that we support each other, that we break down those walls of race and whatever else gets in our way, learn to communicate and work together, because we must have a strong, solid movement for these issues that we believe so strongly in, or we won't, you know, we don't want to go that far backward from this defining moment for George W. I could go on, but I won't on that one. At IWN, we've been publishing a magazine since 1991, and every time, you know, I've just been doing this the last two. I was doing the final edit, and we shipped it off the other day, and I just kind of went back and went, we publish a magazine. That's just so amazing to me, because it's so unique. The women, especially of Native nations, understand that we are the mothers of our nations, and it is up to us to take care of our future and our children's future. And I think that's why in the environmental movement and a few other movements, women get a little fierce. Have you noticed that? It's so great. I love it. It's someone described it to me as the mama bear. Something comes after the cub and we rise up. And that's, I think, one of the most beautiful things about Native women and women in general. And of course, the good-hearted men who love them and have the good sense to be in this room tonight and working and working as friends and allies with us, because it all has to be together. We can no longer be separatists on our issues, about our sex, about our sexuality, about anything else. The time has come to really break down those barriers and work together across all these lines. If you're working on education, you're probably working on poverty and food problems and all, you know, the violence, everything else. All these issues cross-cut. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Thank you so much. It's so important that there's a space for the lovers and friends and allies of peace, because I really fear the nuclear weapons that are out there in the hands of mad, crazy people, including the ones here in our country. It's just scary what can come, and hopefully not those bombs. You know, I have a hard time thinking about what can happen. So waging peace is probably one of the most important things that we can talk about and try to do right now, even though we still continue to work on all of our other issues, as we always will, because when you get committed to an issue, when you become an activist, we used to say, help, I'm contaminated, I can't shut up. You know, it's that kind of thing where you get hooked. Was that a beer commercial? No, she fell down, yeah. So, and you do get hooked, and we can't let those issues go. But right now, we really have to talk about peace. And I think Native people can again bring a lot to the table. We understand how to live sustainably, or we used to. And I think one of the things that I continue to say is that we must remember who we were when we were a healthy people, because we were healthy. And now we're pretty disabled, but there's healing that's going on, and it gives me so much hope. And it takes allies to help that healing continue. So I really appreciate all the allies and friends that are here, and especially the Native brothers and sisters that have come out, because that's what it takes, is for us to come together and listen to each other's issues, and go to each other's meetings and support each other, so that when the time comes, we can put out the call, and there's a lot larger group to come in with political will, as Winona has taught me about, because Natives have had little political will. We've had little access and little resource, and we've been beat down to the point where it's been really hard. So this year in my political growth as a 49-year-old woman, I made my first trip out of the United States and went to South Africa to the World Conference Against Racism. The top of my head was blown off, I tell you. I learned so much. I was just amazed. And America, we're not the first ones to learn about activism and how to organize, and we're not the best. I was just like standing against the wall, just whoa. It was totally guerrilla organizing. A statement would get rumored around and come out about 10 o'clock, and by 11:30 there were banners and posters and t-shirts, and it's like, whoa, we can't even find the fax machine or telephones, or, you know, they were so on it. It was just amazing. But that gave us 3 or 4 days, we got going. We ended up organizing the full protest after the U.S. walked out, borrowed the Zulu dancers' drum and made sure we were singing strong warrior women songs in front of the press. We gave them a lot of hell, I have to tell you. We were white folks until we put on our beads and feathers, and then they were right there. You know, we gave them a lot of trouble for that, at a racism conference, no less. We had a lot of fun, I have to tell you. I was able to have meetings with people like Cuba people. You know, it was amazing, and they were people. It was great. She was a cool woman, and we had a wonderful talk, and they supported our issue. Learning how to lobby governments was a new experience for me. We took 3 young women with us to train, because we are trying to fill the shoes again of Ingrid Washinewatak El Isa, because she did the international work for probably 20, 25 years. Just started out very young with the International Indian Treaty Council and went to the Indigenous Peoples Working Group for many years. So we were filling some big spaces there. So we are committed to training young women and training new leadership within the Native communities to do this work. At Mohawk this spring, we put out the call and told them we were going to the UN, and one of our sisters, Tanya Frischner in New York City, says, oh yeah, you know, they said they pat me on the back and their eyes kind of glaze over, and oh, we're so happy you do this work, Tanya. And they just kind of, oh, you know, don't quite get it. This year, we were just sort of stormed by the women who wanted to participate, and it was just amazingly overwhelming. The clan mothers came and blessed us and smudged us and gave us special tobacco and prayers, and they all wanted the date we were flying and the date we would fly home so they could pray for our safety and pray for our work there. And that's why I believe we got home safely on the 10th. Flying through Florida and Atlanta, you know, just thank you, Creator. You just never know. So we had an amazing time there. We learned a lot. I was able to secure the only meeting with the U.S. delegation. It was great. The sea-level delegation, they called themselves. They're so low-level, they said. We didn't have to even do it for them. They were already joking and making fun of themselves. It was great. So, secured this meeting, and it was like 20 minutes before they pulled out of the conference. And they came in and said, you know, we know you're all really wanting to talk to us and beat us up and tell us all this stuff, but we have to make an announcement first. The U.S. is pulling out. And then they said, please don't tell anybody. I was like, yeah, right. So they stayed like 30, 40 minutes and answered some pretty tough questions. We had some good, hard-hitting people in the room that could go after them, and we did, but in a good way, and we made some alliances. So I feel like we did a lot, and that gives me hope politically, and that we can make a difference because those are people. And if you get to their heart, and if your heart is up front, you can get to those people. And I feel your hearts. And I'm so happy you're here, and I'm so honored to be among you that I'm going to just get off the stage right now and encourage you to please, I mean, this is so hard to ask you to support us, but we want to come back here. We want to do capacity institutes. We want to help, and we want to continue bringing Honor the Earth and the important things that we do with Honor the Earth, Winona, IEN, the Indigenous Environmental Network, and the Indigenous Women's Network. Thank you all so much for coming out. Mwah. Here's Winona LaDuke.
Hi there. I was going to start passing out bifocals. It's like, that'd probably help at this point. So we did it, I was sitting over here and this lady said, we do have a joke. We were trying to muster up a little joke to go with this evening, and it is, why do Indians go like this? You know, you always see those, you know, they're going like this, and they're looking like this, and this. So you want to know why Indians go like this? Because if they went like this, they couldn't see. Want to take a bow over there? The ladies from the Indian Center over here. Anyway, Buju or Hanin in Dinoy Maganatuk. That's hello, my relatives in Anishinaabe, Miigwech, Albamata thank you for this good life here. Miigwech, Dinoy Maganatuk, thank you for having me here. Makwa Indo Deum, Gaba Saga Iganing in Dunjaba, Gawa Babani Ka Gishkaniganing in Dunjaba. I'm from the White Earth Reservation in northwestern Minnesota, and I'm very honored to be here with you tonight, and thankful that you've all come out to spend an evening, visit about some things, and support the groups that are all here, and all the Native organizations, and thank you for coming. I'm very grateful. When I thought about what to talk about tonight, you know, we all think about a lot of things, but there's a concept in Ojibwe. There's a word in Ojibwe, our language in our area, which is Ji Misa Wabandaming. We have that kind of language that sounds like that. Ji Misa Wabandaming, which means positive window shopping for your future. You like that? That's good, huh? I really like that when my Ojibwe teacher told me that, you know, so I said, okay, that's it. That's what I'm about. You know, about the process of this Jimisa Wabandaming, about the process of thinking about what we want our future to look like and how we're going to get to that process and how we're going to get there. And I want to talk a little bit about some of that process in our own community organizing and our own experience, but I think that is really what we need to be about. Because the reality is that change is one thing that is constant. Change is inevitable, but it is always just a question as to who controls the change. And I think a lot of the process that us as individuals, as human beings, as the folks who live here need to be about is determining what our destiny is, and determining what those changes will be, and determining how to do those things to set our hands and our hearts to make a better place for our future generations. And that is the beauty of our lives, our responsibility, and the gift of us as humans. So I'm going to tell you about what motivates and it helps our work in our own community, but first I got to pour some water here. Watch, I'll spill it. I'm motivated by a couple of things, a number of things, but I'll tell you, one of the primary things which motivates me is that I'm a mom. I'm a mother. I have 3 kids of my own. I have a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 19-month-old. And the 19-month-old usually travels with me. He's not here now. He's up in Arley visiting around. But I also have 4 other children I raise in my household. I have 7 kids from 14 down to almost 2 in my household, and I'm very privileged to be a mother and to parent those kids the best I can. And everyone who is a parent knows that that is a great privilege, and it is also one of the hardest jobs you could have. I'm trying to figure out how to do the right thing. As a mother, I always struggle with trying to do that. And you know, if you watch TV and you watch it, if you watch the prescribed amount of television that most individuals watch in a week or in a day or in a year, you end up with about 40,000 commercials a year. Did you know that? That's a lot of TV, that's a lot of commercials, but that's what most Americans are today watching. And if you watch those commercials, there are a lot of teachings about how you're supposed to be a good mother in those. And so I take a lot of notes. And I have noted that there are some things, like first of all, you're supposed to shop really good. You're supposed to look at like the multitude of products that are out there that have these minuscule differences between them and really make really informed decisions by reading the back of your box tops, right? So I try to do that the best I can. The other thing is that you're supposed to make sure that you get that laundry really white. And I don't know, I might have failed a little bit in that one. I'm kind of like, at this point with all those kids, I'm like, you will wash your own clothes. I think that'd probably be a good idea. I know, but anyway, what I'll tell you is that I have learned some things, and one of the things I learned is this thing about shopping. So in my house, I just had to make some rules, and we made this rule in my house. This one rule I have is that you're only allowed to eat brown breakfast cereal. I figured I'd just go for that, brown breakfast cereal. Because otherwise, it saves a lot of trouble, in the store, quarreling with all those kids about what they should get. I just said, and the reason, my thinking on this is that first of all, is that I believe the Creator only intended for breakfast cereal to be brown. That'll be it. That Fruit Loops was not on the initial list and should not be on any subsequent list in my house. That saves a lot of trouble. But what I realized that as a mother is that it's very hard to figure out why I should spend all this time trying to figure out how much sugar is in my kids' breakfast cereal and how many vitamins there are, and not be concerned about how much dioxin is in my kids' tissue, or how much PCBs or methylmercury from coal-fired power plants and incinerators, or pulp mills from the dioxin. And I realized that kind of the broader context of responsible parenting in this day and age requires that I have to go and figure out how to stop that stuff from getting into my kids' tissue. And so that is what drives a higher level of political activism than I would necessarily be comfortable with. I will tell you that I also am motivated by what are some simple values. And I think that no matter what kind of household you are raised in, there are certain things that you are taught by your parents. I would assume if you didn't learn these lessons, you better go back and check with your folks. But some of those lessons are, for instance, I was always told, and I tell my kids, don't steal. Y'all heard that one, right? Don't steal, right? You aren't supposed to steal. And yet I live on an Indian reservation in northwestern Minnesota. It's a lot like the Salish and Kootenai reservation up here. We have 837,000 acres, and we got 47 lakes on our reservation. And inside our reservation, 90% of the land is held by non-Indian interests. And the largest landholder is the federal, state, and county governments who took that land illegally. So I find if I tell my kids not to steal, I must in fact tell the government not to steal. If the government takes land from Indian people, the government should return land to Indian people. It's a very simple proposition, but it is the truth, and I have to say it across the board. That's what I tell my kids, and that's what I tell the government. I spend a lot of time trying to tell the government that, but they are not so good on the not stealing thing yet, so we're working on that. I tell my kids not to be greedy, and in this country, this is very difficult, because this country is a country which totally aggrandizes wealth. We are interested in the stories of the rich and famous, and we are not interested in the stories of the poor and unknown. And we spend endless amounts of inane time studying and listening to retelling stories of these people. You know, my grandma, bless her, I have a lot of interesting women in my family, but my grandma, one time I watched that movie. What was that movie called? The First Wives. Remember this one? Remember that one with Bette Midler and Diane Keaton and Goldie Hawn? And I was watching that movie, and I said, Grandma, I thought that was a really funny movie. And I said, did you watch that movie? She said, why would I watch that movie? That is a bunch of rich people. I'm not interested in the stories of rich people. I'm sick of the stories of rich people. So that's kind of I was kind of raised in a household that was kind of conscious of class, to say the least. But it is true, because that is kind of the focus that we have in this society. And one of the things is that I notice we live in a society in which greed is so aggrandized that we don't even ask people the source of their wealth anymore. We don't ask if they got their wealth by appropriating someone else's land or someone else's natural resources, or taking trees off of our national forest for a quarter on the dollar, or for not paying a decent living wage in their factories. We don't ask how they got their wealth. We just assume that somehow they must have earned it. And the reality is, in this day and age, that there's this incredible amount of greed, and this disparity of wealth which exists on a worldwide scale is in fact something which is one of the most disconcerting sources of problems we live in this world today. One of the things I can't get over is there's 225 people in the world whose income last year was the same income as the bottom 2.5 billion people in the world. 225 folks who made more than 2.5 billion people in the world. Now talk about not learning the lesson of sharing. Like you cannot take it with you, buddy. And in this country, we have exactly the same set of problems. We have the largest disparity of wealth of any industrialized country in the world. And it is getting worse. It is not getting better. And in Montana, I think that you all know that pretty well, because this is not one of the richest states in the country, and this is one of the states that, isn't it, this is a state where the most people have to have two jobs of any state in the country? And that is the story of working families across this country. And that disparity is something that, so if I tell my own kids not to be greedy, I have to argue in this broader context that we need to not be greedy. One of the most challenging things in parenting in my household of all those children is that I tell my kids, we have this little rule, which is the rule of sanity, which is you must clean up your old mess before you make a new mess. Do you hear this rule in your house, right? That is like it's like the maid service will not be arriving. You must clean up your old mess until you make, before you make any new messes. And why is it that we don't run this country like that? Just look at Montana. That is a perfect example of this as a problem. Whether it is the mining industry is an example of that. But one of the best examples of that in this country is nuclear industry. First of all, just like what Pam was talking about, there is the nuke speak mythology, which is the idea, for instance, of a nuclear cycle. There's no such thing as a nuclear cycle, buddy, because uranium is not plutonium. A cycle implies that it is the same thing at the beginning and the end, and I'm going to tell you that nuclear waste is nuclear waste. That's what it is. It's the end of a chain, is what it is. It's a nuclear chain. And in this country, what do we got? After 50 years of pretty much, the nuclear age, and we have 50 years of everybody dutifully paying their rates, some of the smartest guys in the world, supposedly, out there working for the nuclear industry. 65% of the research and development money in the Department of Energy for like 40 years went to nuclear power. Talk about corporate welfare. And pretty much anything the nuclear industry asks for. And what did they come up with after 50 years of nuclear power in this country with what to do with their waste? They came up with the proposals of Yucca Mountain and Skull Valley Goshoots, which is take the nuclear waste from 103 nuclear reactors in this country, put it on trucks and trains, drive it within a half a mile of 75 million Americans, and go out and dump it on an Indian reservation. That is not only totally shameful, that is the essence of not cleaning up your mess. That is pretty much saying, I'm just going to let somebody else take care of my mess. That is what nuclear power is in this country. And it is not only is it really bad manners, it is incredibly bad public policy. And that is, that is the essence, I think, of one of the challenges we face, is figuring out how to, my philosophy is pretty much, if you don't know how to clean up your mess, don't make it in the first place. That would be the simple solution. In my house, we have the teaching of you are responsible for your actions. You guys have that? My 2-year-old is not really responsible for his actions. But once you get to be a teenager, you get to be responsible for your actions. I enjoy being responsible for my actions because it makes me feel like I have some control over my destiny and I'm a responsible adult. But one of the things which is maddening in this society has been the creation of industrial law, was the creation of the Limited Liability Corporation. That is a new creation under industrial law, and that is pretty much actually, you are not actually responsible for your actions. The Limited Liability Corporation is something which kind of is, the teaching is you can make as much money as you want to and only have limited liability for any problems you might create with your money. And that, again, is the essence in my sensibilities of bad public policy. So it is this division between what I consider to be kind of basic fundamental teachings of sanity in one's own house, and then the juxtaposition between that and what one finds in the broader society. Now, of course, my 11-year-old son, who is quite crafty, has not yet come up with, well, Mom, since the nuclear industry doesn't clean up their mess, I won't have to clean up my room. I'm sure, given the opportunity, he will try that a few times, but then there's always the alternatives that Mom has in the household. But having said that, those are some of the things that drive me to a broader level of political action. And then in this day and age, I am reminded of one of the other fundamental teachings that I have in my house, which is don't fight. And whether it's not fighting with your sister or it's trying not to fight with your mom. And as we look out in a society in a country which prepares for war, I recall the history of fighting in this country and the funding that has been that this country has given to fights around the world, whether it is the terrorism that we funded in Guatemala, the death squads in Guatemala and El Salvador, or in Chiapas, the $52 million of military aid we sent to Mexico for how many years? And who is Mexico's known enemy? Who is going to invade Mexico? Why do they need $52 million with military aid? Who's going to invade them? Guatemala? Texas? Who's going to invade Mexico? Why do they need $52 million worth of military aid? They need that to repress the people within their country. Or the millions of dollars we spent in the 70s, seeing a Henry Kissinger appear on CNN. A lot of you are young, but I remember, I don't have the fondest memories of Henry Kissinger from the era of the overthrow of Allende in Chile, or the covert actions that were undertaken during his era. And that is, these teachings in my own house of do not fight beckon back the same things which Pam was talking about, how we must renew and continue our struggle to wage peace in this world, and renew and redouble our efforts at looking towards peace for the future. So it is those things, being a parent, and the need to, as a mother, try to have some semblance of sanity between what I teach in my house and what is in the broader society, which drives a good deal, a good portion of my political activism. I will tell you that the political activism also in my own community and in broader communities quite often I find is also the guidance of our prophecies and of our teachers and our elders in our communities. And I don't know about the teachings of a lot of other Indigenous communities, but I know that many of our teachings say similar things. And in our community, and that our teachings are teachings that guide us. They are historic, but they are things which we hold to our hearts. They are not folklore. They are not things that are, put aside in our back, in the back, but they are things which we keep with us. In my own community, a long time ago, these prophets came to us, and they came and they talked about these times ahead, and they talked about those times ahead in terms of fires. And they talked about the 7 fires ahead. And they talked about the time of the first fire in our migration from the east to the west as an Anishinaabe people. And that was our teaching. And they said that we moved to a place where the food grows upon the water. And that would be wild rice. And that is where we went to, and that is where we live today. And then they said that we would have some difficult times of our own making. And I tell you that because no society has a monopoly on botching things up. We are all quite capable, because we are humans, of botching things up. The challenge is to be able to, through prayer, through ceremony, through your own will, to fix what you have botched up. And but that is a natural part of being human, is that is what we are, is we do make mistakes. But then they talked about that things would change, and some people would come, and some of those people in the time of the third fire would have a good heart, and some of those people who came would have a bad heart. And that is certainly true. The history of this country is a history of some good people and some bad people coming. And even as I consider the challenges of democracy, having been a person who ran not once but twice for office in this country, I think it is important in this era of renewed enthusiasm and patriotism to recognize that even democracy in this country has had some flaws. At its outset, do not forget that the only people who could vote were white men who owned property. And they had to get that from someplace. And usually it was stolen. And many of those white men themselves had slaves. Do not forget that it was a hard-fought struggle for many of us to participate in the right to vote in this country, or the right to participate in any way in this country. And that if they actually had one man, one vote in the time when Sitting Bull was around, things would probably look quite a bit different in this country than they do now. But Indian people were not accorded the right to vote until we were less than 1% of the population in this country. So remember those teachings when, in this time of patriotism and this time of renewed flag waving, we talk about the history of this country. And remember that the history and that which is good in this country has been struggled for by the hearts and hands and minds of individuals like your and my older people, our people that we came from, those who struggled for everything that we have in this country. But they talked about these people who came, and as I said, some were good and some were bad. And one of the things that I find now that troubles me a lot in the bad people list, which is pretty long, and the good people list, which is a little shorter, of the initial people, I shouldn't be so trite. I cannot look into the hearts of all those people. But what I will tell you is that some of the people that were the worst are the people that were the most aggrandized by this society. And one of the things that I remember all the time is, I went to school on the East Coast. I was raised in Southern Oregon, and I lived in small towns most of my life, but I went to Boston to go to school, to Cambridge, and because I wanted to get away from little redneck towns in the West. That is a true story. I wanted to see how those other people lived. And I went out there, and out there in the East, they got, you ever heard of Amherst, Massachusetts? They got all this Amherst this, Amherst Street, Amherst that, Amherst, college, all these places named Amherst. And this guy Amherst, you know who that guy was? Lord Jeffrey Amherst. And Lord Jeffrey Amherst was like the initial purveyor of smallpox-ridden blankets. The guy was like a monster, is what he was. And I will tell you that, we would not, in this day and age, name cities or towns after Hitler or Eichmann, But yet at the same time, that is essentially what, there are a lot of names in this country. There are the names, whether they are named after Kit Carson or Harney or members of the 7th Cavalry or Amherst, that scar this beautiful land that is here. And they are names that should not be. They are names that should, for the goodness that is here, they are names that should be revisited and names that should be removed. So I tell you that because that was some of the people that came, and some were good, as I said, and some were bad. And then they talked about this difficult time that would come, and many of our people would perish, they said, and then many of our people would disappear, and they did not know the things that would happen to our people. But, you know, if we talk about depopulation, it was significant here, and I think that you know that. And then they talked about how more of our people and our things would go away, and I guess that they were talking then about the boarding schools, you know, and those prophecies. And then they were talking about things that they wouldn't know, that these anthropologists would come and collect your whole village, you know, and haul it off to a museum. But that is what happened to our people. You know, whole villages hauled off to museums. And throughout this country, our people have been robbed of our assets. You know, they have been hauled off to these museums. But then they talked about this time would come, they talked about the sixth fire. And in the sixth fire, they said that our people would go and they would start to recover those things, and they would start to bring back those things. And, you know, how could those guys so long ago know? But they said that they would go and they would get those things back, and whether that was our drums or our ceremonial items or our bodies of our ancestors. And they would bring those people back, and they would become whole again. And they said that we would become these people who would remember our songs and remember our teachings and remember who we were, and that we would be called the Ashki Anishinabeg, people who were in recognition of our history. That is what they said we were, people who were that. And then they said this time would come, and that would be the time of the seventh fire, when the Ashki Anishinabeg were here. And in that time, they said that in that time of the seventh fire, they said that there were two Mikana ahead of us. And one Mikana, one path, they said, was well worn, but it was scorched. That is what they said. And they said that the other path was not well worn, and it was green. And the choice would be for us as individuals and as a community upon which path we would embark. And that is what they said, those prophets, a long, long time ago. And I tell you that story because I am absolutely sure that that is where we are as Anishinaabe people, but I think that that is absolutely where we are as a society today. We are a society which has choices upon which path to embark. And that is a choice to be made by individuals, to be made by villages, by towns, and by a society overall. So I think that those teachings that are a long time ago are teachings that have very great merit and guide us in our times today. So having said that, I'm going to talk a little bit about community organizing and the work both in our own reservation and the work of Honor the Earth and some of the groups that you may know out there. I am privileged to be here to visit with you today. I spend a good portion of my time on my own reservation in northwestern Minnesota as a community organizer. You know, for those of you who are college students, I encourage you to think about the nonprofit sector of work. You'll never make a lot of money, but you will sleep pretty good at night, and you will feel like you do the right thing, you know? And there is a great a quality of life within that you can never measure in terms of income, but you can measure it in terms of how you feel about what you do. And our organization, the White Earth Land Recovery Project, we have some products out there from our land. It's called Native Harvest, our items, and some stuff about our organization. But we formed to struggle on the issues of recovery of our land, our cultural practices, and economic justice, racial justice issues, and environmental justice issues. And we formed about a decade ago, in 1989, after we had exhausted all our legal recourses to seek return of our land. I am someone who, like a lot of other Indian people in this country, has been all the way through the court system of the United States, all the way through the court system, and the courts ruled that our land was taken illegally. But this is to kind of summarize the court decision. The court said, although your land was taken illegally, the statute of limitations has expired. And you should have filed within 7 years of the original time of taking. There you go. Which is really handy in 1986. It is really handy considering that my grandparents, just like myself, were legally wards of the federal government. And my grandparents, though, could not read or write, spoke only Indian, and the federal government, having not litigated those cases on our behalf to get back our land, whether it was from the Weyerhaeuser Empire, which started on my reservation in northern Minnesota. You know, talk about picking bad neighbors. You know, just south of us, Frederick Weyerhaeuser started his little mill, got a little help from the feds, got a little railroad that went to our reservation, you know, cut his little trees and then moved west. There you go. That's how it starts. Lucky him, huh? You know, unlucky us. He got the trees and we lost our land. And, you know, the government ruled that what had happened was illegal, but it was too bad, you know, pretty much. And so I stand in front of you as someone who has exhausted my legal recourse. I've been all the way through the courts in this country. I've been to Congress to try to get back our land, and have not seen a generous Congress in my entire lifetime. You know, I'm not sure when that generous spirit will return to Congress, but I am praying that at some time, some of you young people will get in there, and that some of you will have good hearts. And you will remember that the rest of us out here, you know, the rest of the people, and not just the people who have the money in this country. And I was at the UN, you know, I talked about these issues, and we looked around, and I tried to get the feds to take care of it, and I tried to get our tribal government to take care of it, and unfortunately in our case they all went to jail. In 1996 our whole council went to jail. But you know, corruption is not exclusive to Indian country. Corruption in government kind of goes around sometimes. I realized that I'd probably get an ulcer if I spent my whole life trying to wait for somebody to fix it. I have a really bad stomach ache, an ulcer, and I'd be crabby most of the time. So rather than wait for someone to fix it, we looked around our community and we decided that we may not be the smartest people, we certainly weren't the richest people, but we were the people who lived there. And if somebody wanted to make a difference in our community and to take responsibility for our community, that would probably be us. And so we started our work. And so we work on trying to get back our land. We seek return of publicly held lands to our community, to our reservation. All government-held lands within our reservation borders, we'd like to see returned to our community on White Earth. And I'll tell you what, you know, I bet that the Salish and Kootenai wouldn't mind having back that national buffalo or national bison range carved right out of their reservation. What about that little glacier park taking up there in the Blackfeet Reservation? I mean, there's like one federal land seizure after another, you know, and these are, or we could just talk about the Black Hills of South Dakota. There you go, another perfect example of federal land seizures. You know, people do not think about these things, but the reality is that, you know, federal land holdings in the Black Hills, for instance, comprise about 80% of the Black Hills. And why can we not have the Lakota National Park, you know, instead of the Black Hills National Park? It is those things, you know, that are at the core of some of the issues, you know, in this country. They will not go away, and they will not go away until they are healed. And so we talk about it in our own reservation, but it is a microcosm of Indian country. It is a microcosm of the issues of injustice. In my teachings in our community, we are told that the only compensation for land is land. You know, you cannot pay us for the value of that land. So we seek the return of those lands, and in the meantime, we acquire land. Our organization, we acquired about 1,500 acres of land so far. We hold it as a land trust. And I'll tell you, if I had 10 million bucks, I could buy $10 million worth of land. We buy from willing sellers. Hear that? Willing sellers, willing buyer, which means if you want to sell to us, we'll buy it. And if I had 10 million bucks, I could buy $10 million worth of land, because a lot of people would sell to us because we take good care of that land up there. But that is what we do. We work on culture. You know, on my reservation, you could work on culture by, because we're a forest culture, trying to keep your trees standing. You can't be a forest culture without a forest. So I spent a lot of time trying to oppose clear cutting. You know, I'm not opposed to logging. I'm not opposed to selective cutting. You know, in our reservation, selective cutting is fine. Some trees should just be left standing, though. You know, that's just the way it is. I'll tell you, my one and only arrest was for, I chained myself to the front of a phone book factory in Los Angeles. You know, because I don't think, it says, you know, they were using 1,000-year-old trees from British Columbia. You know, I don't think a 1,000-year-old tree should be a phone book. You know, they could do a little more recycling out there, you know. And you know, that's what we do, and I work on culture issues. For those of you, I wrote this article, see, that's why I brought it up here. Under the wild rice moon. This is the wild rice Menominee Geezus. This is a wild ricing moon on my reservation. And I'm just gonna, some of you are probably eat organic food and stuff. I just want to flag for you this big issue in our community, which is, like I told you, the Creator gave us that rice and told us to go to the place where the food grows upon the water. We're given that rice to sustain us, and it has sustained us for all these years. And it still does. You know, I went out ricing in late August on my reservation, and you know, we rice to feed our family, and then we also rice and market that rice. And you know, in a community that's got 50% of the people at or below the poverty level, you can earn some income from you know, getting a fair price for your rice. You get $1.50 a pound at Lakeside, and if you market it, you know, our organization gets $5 a pound. And what happened is about 15 years ago, the University of Minnesota did some looking into the rice, and they figured out how to domesticate wild rice. And so they named it Minnesota State Grain, and here by the late 70s, lo and behold, the largest wild rice producing state in the country is now California. 2/3 of all rice that's produced that's out there that's wild rice comes from California. And I have it on pretty good, some good sources that tell me that Uncle Ben's did not get wild rice from the Creator. Uncle Ben's appropriated the rice and should not have had the rice in the first place. But that's a spiritual discussion we'll have to have later on. In the meantime, one of the issues we have, even these organic stores a lot of times are buying paddy rice, and it is totally an issue of fair trade. You could buy rice at $5 a pound that was grown in a paddy in California, or you could buy rice from Indian people and these communities that need that income to support their families, to buy their school clothes for their kids. And it is a choice of conscientious shoppers. And I know a lot of people buy fair trade produced coffee. Think about your rice. But now, in this day and age, one of our big concerns is that the University of Minnesota now mapped the genome for wild rice. And why do you think they mapped the genome? You think they're interested in the quality of rice on Indian reservations? No, I don't think so. They mapped the genome of rice because they want to use rice to benefit other cereal crops in the larger context and things that they have learned from rice. And so our tribes are very concerned about this mapping of the rice genome. But I'm equally and perhaps more concerned about the fact that I just discovered, I was a little late on the noting this, but that there's a guy in Northern California, a company called NorCal, that patented wild rice last year. And that seems like an oxymoron to me, doesn't it? Like patent wild rice, patent wild rice. Those seem like two words that should not go together, right? And we are really concerned that this guy's going to come up there and say that he owns the rice in northern Minnesota, or that they'll start messing around with that rice, and then pretty soon we won't have no rice in northern Minnesota because they've done something funky to that rice. So I tell you that because the issues in my community may seem like far away from you, but those are issues of globalization. Those are issues of biodiversity and cultural and intellectual property rights, and whether it is Uncle Ben's or whether it is Stouffer's or NorCal or whoever it is, has the right to own life. That is what those questions are about. And that story of our community is the story of many indigenous communities, and whether it is farming communities in India, fighting about their basmati rice, or whether it is our community or, all across this world, people fighting just for the right to continue their existence and their way of life and not have somebody say that they own that way of life. So that is the work that we do in our community. And it is, it's a small thing, but it is the work that is going on across this country and across this world. Or I guess that the world is round, so we have to say around this world. In small communities to protect these rights and to do the right thing for our future. But one of the things we learned in our community organizing that I'm sure all of you know, and that Pam talked about as well, is that it is important to not only say what is wrong, but it is also important to say what is right. And to make sure that you try to live that which is right in the best you can, So in our community, we harvest maple syrup to illustrate that our forests are worth more standing than cut. And you can taste spring each spring when you go out there in the maple syruping, the maple sugar bush. And we market our rice. And because I was, I know Gail Small out here from Montana, who's, a really amazing woman and has been fighting coal strip mining her whole life and coal methane now. And, I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And continue saying, really, Gail, I really support you in your struggle against coal strip mining out here, but can I just keep having that energy from out there in Montana? We just need it over there. Because I see those coal trains, they go from through my reservation, and they don't travel east to west, they travel west to east. That's how coal trains move, and I know where they're coming from. They're coming from North Dakota and Montana. Make that alternative, and it makes a better place for their communities. So that is our work. Why someone like me would be engaged in broader political activism with, all those kids in my house and all that work in my own reservation. I'll tell you that, I've been privileged to work with Honor the Earth since 1993. I've done work nationally in the Indian community for a number of years. I had a lot of worked in different Indian communities, mostly around energy development issues. And what I noted in the course of my life is something that many of you have probably noted as well, is that quite often we work in communities and we are geographically isolated. And quite often we are politically disenfranchised in our communities. We are not considered to be those who are worthy of having political favors, whether it is in Washington or whether it is in Helena. And it is those, you know, and what we find and what we know in our hearts is that we are as worthy as anyone else. And we have just as much right as any other person in the world to determine our destiny. And in order to sometimes to engage in a stronger struggle, it is important to build alliances, to break your isolation, to draw in the attention from someone perhaps from someplace else, whether it is by bringing in musicians like Bonnie Raitt in the Indigo Girls, because someone will listen if there are some white girls singing with guitars, you know? You know, whatever works, you know, we're up for that. And those are some really fine women. You know, any of you had an opportunity to know and listen to those women as well as meet them, they are excellent, excellent human beings. But, you know, that's what, you know, sometimes whether it is listening to those other folks who come in and draw attention to that issue because the society is so focused on celebrity status, you know, or whether it is figuring out how to build political power by, you know, raising consciousness in a broader level of students and having them do a political action or write a letter to somebody to support things, you know. That's what we noticed in Honor the Earth. The first project we worked on is this village called Point Hope, Alaska, way up there. That's as far as I could describe it. It's like so far out there. And these guys, you know, it's so inhumane. In the 1960s, the federal government conducted some tests up there. They wanted to, and I read about this study in like 1979, and I thought, this is not true. You know, but they wanted to study the impact of radiation on the lichen caribou man cycle. You know? So they took dirt from ground zero of the Nevada test site, and they stuck it up there by this village in this remote area of Alaska, and then watched what happened. You know? And that is, you know, the stories that we hear now of testing on communities, you know, and those people, you know, got very ill, you know, and they asked for many years. It was not until I think 1993 that a lot of those documents even got declassified, you know, what was happening to their people. And so we worked with some national organizations and that community to write letters to get a cleanup of their village. And I think we got like 25,000 postcards that we sent into Washington, which was far more than all of the residents of Point Hope you could bet, you know? And oh, that's, whoever had that tape is gone. I don't know how to, okay, thank you. Technologies, I'm short on that. But anyway, so we got those letters in and we started the cleanup of Point Hope. And I tell you that because that is sometimes how things need to be done. Sometimes you got to break the isolation of a community and draw attention to a broader set of issues. So we worked on that. We worked on dams up in James Bay. You know, isolated communities way up in Canada, huge dam projects to keep the lights on in New York City. You know, and who has the right to flood an area the size of, you know, put an area underwater like the size of West Germany? And destroy these villages and destroy this ecosystem just to keep the lights on someplace else. Basic issues of justice. And we worked in the New York Times. They called us, I took this with great, I thought this was a great compliment. The New York Times called us a ragtag band of activists. I kind of like that. And we took on these huge energy corporations, Hydro-Quebec, and the New York Power Authority and all the utilities in the Northeast and Shearson, Lehman and all those guys. And we said, this is a bad investment. These guys are, you know, not only violating human rights, but they're costing a lot of money, that they're spending their money not very wisely. And we went to every college in the Northeast, and I remember going to these colleges like Brown University, and 2 days later, Hydro-Quebec would come to the college with their little PR company, you know. And we took them on. You know, and we talked about what was going on, and and students, like a lot of you, went out there and got their colleges to divest in stock in Hydro-Quebec. That's what they did. Those students, they got out there and they organized, and they got their colleges to divest in stock at Hydro-Quebec. And then those students went out there and did further organizing, and we took out ads and we wrote letters to the power authorities, and the New York Power Authority canceled its contracts with Hydro-Quebec. And that project, at that time, James Bay 2, it was like a really bad sequel to James Bay 1, like Bruce Willis or something. And James Bay 2 was canceled. You know, and the New York Times said, how could those guys do that? But that's because people got out and organized, and that is how change is made. So I tell you those stories because that is very much the stories of Honor the Earth. And we've been privileged for many years to work with grassroots communities across this country on trying to draw attention to those issues. And those are the issues which compel each of us to sometimes to get out of our own arena of comfort. I am someone who has also, as you know, run for a national office, as I said, twice. And you know, why I would do something like that is, you know, a couple of reasons. First reason is because Ralph asked me. And Ralph is kind of like your grandma, you know, he's like almost impossible to say no to. But when I was a little girl, the truth is that I have 3 heroes, and one was Batman, and one was Spider-Man, and one was Ralph Nader. And that is true. And the first time I said that, and Ralph was standing kind of next to me, and he like blushed, and I never saw Ralph blush in my whole life. But I've been thinking, you know, in recent years that Ralph would look good if he would don some tights. Don't you think? And then I had this other plan for Ralph, which was, you know that movie Toy Story? You guys are all, you know that movie Toy Story. And you know that character, his name is Woody? And you know the doll, did any of you ever see the Woody doll that they came out with? He was kind of made of cloth, and he was really kind of cute, and he had this little chain in the back, and I thought, I've been trying to get Ralph to do this, which was, I was thinking we should do a Ralph doll. And then he could pull the back of it, and it'd say, fight corporate crime, fight corporate crime. Then we could remember and reinforce as heavily as Mattel and these other guys are these important messages that we need to our children. But I also engaged in this process because sometimes extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary times. And the struggles that I found that are the struggles of our Native communities are also the struggles of many of our communities across the board. And I am someone who is very rarely engaged in electoral politics. I will tell you honestly, as I stand in front of you, that I did not even vote until 1996. I was a member of the largest party in America, which is the non-voters. That is still the largest party in America. Every time the Democrats and the Republicans go boasting and spending those millions of dollars at their big parties that they have, remember that the largest party in America is the non-voters. And one of the things that I realized in this country, and one of the things I learned a lot of good lessons on here in Montana the last time, is that it is really important to get people out to vote. Because you can get people elected when you get out the vote. And the lesson I saw here in Montana in getting, was it 6 Indians elected to the Montana legislature? Totally unprecedented in history. You know, and I know that Judy is still over there talking about how she's the lapdog of industry, but there was some really good work that was done here. And I'll tell a lot of you young people to think about that process as one arena of political work, both getting out the vote, because there is a direct relationship in this country of income and voter participation. The poorest people do not vote. The most politically and financially and economically disenfranchised are less likely to vote than the wealthier. And there is perhaps some reflection of that in who gets elected, but also I will tell you that one thing that you should also consider is that, did you know that there are over 2 million elected positions in this country? 2 million. I was like, what? 2 million elected, that's like drain commissioners, you know, treasurers of this, that. There are a lot of elected positions in this country, and about 30% of those positions go uncontested. So think about that, you know, as you think about, you know, your work in the future. And the electoral process is one of the processes that I encourage folks to engage in. But I will tell you that in the lessons of both the last election and the lessons of Honor the Earth and our political work, there are certain things that are constants. You know, there are certain things that are the nature of this society. The reality is that we have a predator-prey relationship with the land. The predator is the industrial society, and the land is the prey. And we are a society which consumes a third of the world's resources. And that level of consumption requires constant intervention into other people's lands and constant violations of other people's human rights. Whether that is on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, out here, or whether that is in Colombia, or whether that is in the Middle East. And those issues are issues that will plague us in this society as an unopened source, always open source. They are struggles that we must engage in order to address that relationship which we have until we can move to a place where we actually have peace with the earth. That is a struggle that we have. I have learned in our work and in our years that our communities have said one thing many times, or they have said things many times. One of the things we have said is that when we say no, that should mean no. And whether we are women, or whether we are small communities with very little political power, like the people in Arctic Village, in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, when you say no, it should mean no. And you have a right to determine your destiny. You have a right to have the integrity of your community and of your bodies. And in order to struggle on those issues, we must continue to be vigilant. In this time we face now, we are, I'm not telling you anything new. We are in for a very difficult time in the upcoming months. But just because George W., I actually listened to his speech a couple nights ago, and I thought that was perhaps the best speech George W. ever gave. I have to admit, and I'm obviously not a George W. fan. He was some of his previous speeches were a little lacking, we would say. Referring to the African nation was a little problem, or when he suggested that the IRA should collect taxes, that'd be good too. I was like, this speech in this time, we could go, there's a lot of George W-isms out there. Just because he is carrying a momentum, and at this time does not mean that we should not continue to say no. Hell yeah. I refuse to be called unpatriotic because I think that George W.'s energy policy is really bad. What is this energy policy? This Dick Cheney, he reminds me, I got these kids, so I watch all these movies. You guys see this, The Spy Who Shagged Me? This guy, Dr. Evil, he's like frozen for 30 years and he comes back. That's like Dick Cheney. I was like, Dick, he comes back and he says, I think we should have 1,000 nuclear power plants in this country. That's like what Nixon said. That was, before Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. We should have learned a couple of things about nuclear power in the past 30 years, Dick. I guess you were sleeping or frozen. Nuclear power was a bad idea 50 years ago. It is a really rotten idea now. Then his other really brilliant idea he woke up with his energy policy was, let's go burn up some dinosaurs and fuel our SUVs. That was a really great idea too, huh? Talk about blast from the past, this guy. So, one of my favorite new projects that I have noted that the Bush-Cheney administration is supporting is this, and I know you guys have noticed this idea, this company is called, I think it's called Rio Bill-Laranda. Have you heard of these guys? It's a conglomeration of Rio Tinto Zinc, it's a joint venture, right? And it's kind of like Rio Tinto Zinc, and it's Billiton, which is a South African mining company, and Noranda Mining. And so it's kind of like if you merge like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot together or something, right, for this project. And these guys, Rio Bill-Laranda, what a heck of a name. They found this huge coal deposit on the back of Mount Rushmore. Did you guys notice this? And so they Gail Norton held this press conference and she was reassuring the reporters that the blasting would not affect the picturesque tourist opportunities or disfigure the presidents. That's important, Gail. I was like, you know, I mean, I myself am not a big fan of Mount Rushmore, I will tell you that right now. But I was thinking that the Bush-Cheney administration might have stopped short, you know, of mining the president's brains. You know? But as it seems, you know, we are going to find out what's in a president's head. I've been trying to figure that out for months. My friend Amy Ray did a concert out there, and she said it was enough of an affront to the Lakota people to carve this mountain in the sacred Black Hills. But now, to dig out the president's cranium, that is just too much. So then what did Janklow say? You know, that guy's an interesting guy. Janklow said, I expected the Indians to say something like that, not upstanding white citizens. Bill. And then, of course, there was the George W. remark on that, which is, I don't think it will make them any dumber. You know, I'm not sure. But anyway, that is the perfect example of the Bush-Cheney energy policy, is the mining of Mount Rushmore. You know, and I don't, we'll see if that one goes through, but that is, you know, of course, the tip of the iceberg. We got the, you know, the energy bill with the bailout, $30 million bailout to a bunch of uranium companies in the Southwest to restart. We got the nuclear power, then we got, of course, the methane development out here. You know, and then the ANWR, and we fully know that, you know, you could, if you just had a little more fuel efficiency in the SUVs, you wouldn't even need any of that oil in ANWR. And then the total absence of funding for alternatives. And you and I know that we are a country which has the total ability to move towards alternative energy. This is a country which is the richest country in the world. The value of the US stock exchange is the value of all other stock exchanges in the world combined. We have no absence of money in this country. What we have is an absence of political will to do the right thing. And you know, as I look out there, and I'm privileged to have been up there at Blackfeet and seen the Blackfeet Wind Development Corporation, or the SAI Corporation's development. That is the future. You know, and I ponder what exactly it is in this country. You know, out here in the Great Plains, they call this the Saudi Arabia of wind power. And that is the future in this area, and why it is that we are behind like really radical countries like Denmark and West Germany, who are leading the industrialized world in wind energy, and why we are lagging so far behind. But that is the future of capitalizing those alternatives. So we must likely work toward leveraging a lot of that money in our own communities through our own initiatives in the upcoming years, and building that forms of energy self-sufficiency. We are also in the time ahead, you know, one of the other concerns of this administration and of all of us is militarization. And I am, you know, whether it is the further transforming of our country's budget. You know, we already spent 1/3 of our federal budget on the military. And that is at the expense. My kids go to school on our reservation in a tribal school in trailers. You know, ask any Indian person on my reservation or a lot of these other communities that the money never trickles down. You go get your teeth pulled at the beginning of the fiscal year, you will not get new teeth till the next fiscal year. You know, that is the state of how money does not get allocated. You know, all of the millions of Americans without health care, and just what Kate was talking about at the beginning, that they just gave, what, $15 billion to the airlines. And the entire welfare budget in this country is $16.5 billion. The really perverse allocation of money that already exists in this country, which is augmented horribly on a worldwide scale. You know, we are a country which has, over the years, pretty much helped arm everybody who the Soviet Union hasn't armed. This is a world in which The vast majority of conflicts in the world today are not undertaken with ICBMs and nuclear missiles. They are undertaken with small guns, if that's what you want to call an M16. World War I, 90% of the people killed in World War I were combatants. Today, 90% of the people killed in conflicts are non-combatants. When we consider our challenges in this country, we must consider the impact of our foreign policy in creating the circumstances we find ourselves in today, and how in the time ahead we work towards building a foreign policy in which we do not walk out of conferences on racism. You know, we have the guts to sit and listen, the maturity to stay at a full conference on racism, you know, and listen to what people say. That we have the honor to stay at full meetings on greenhouse emissions without walking away. That we have the honor in our wealth, being generous and being just, you know. The amount that poor nations have given to this country in terms of natural resources not paid for in fair prices. The amount that poor countries have given to this country in terms of paying the interest on their loans in terms of debt far surpasses the amount that any of those countries owe us today. The Jubilee movement, you know, a righteous movement of many churches and of many people in this country, is the movement of our future. Of saying that instead of giving you guys bombs, we will relieve your debt. Instead of giving you bombs, we will give you wheat and rice. And we will help retransform your economies so that they do not feed our needs, but instead they feed your communities. Because that is where true peace and true stability come from. Those are the issues that we work on in our small communities, but that are these broad issues. And we are drawn into them because we are mothers or because we are humanitarians. And sometimes we are drawn into them reluctantly because I myself did not pay lots of attention to Colombia. You know, I knew what went on there was wrong, but when my sister was shot by the FARC 3 years ago, and with a bullet that I paid for, you know, that is the reality. I paid for the bullet. Second largest recipient of US military aid after Israel is Colombia. I paid for the darn bullet that killed my sister, you know. I realize that the world is far too small, and the time we are here is far too short to not raise our voices to a broader level. My friend Ralph says sometimes the private citizen must become the public citizen. And that is what many of you, I am sure, do in your work and in your lives. So having said that, you know, the questions of when the broader society will waken up to some of these issues, there is no easy answer. Maybe George W. and the other guys in Washington, my friend Tom Goldtooth, he says, you know, was asked when people would wake up to environmental toxins in the environment and the impact on our descendants and on ourselves. And he said, and this is probably true of George W. as well, is that when the white men in the world realize that the chemicals in the environment are causing their testicles to shrink, then money will flow like water to the environmental movement. And I think that is true. And the unfortunate fact is that is what is happening, guys. And so soon is good. Action is good. We support that action. But in the end, no matter, you know, in the end, what our teachings always say is that no matter how much money you have, you know, and how much you know, you do on this earth, in the end, we are all accountable to the same Creator, you know, and we will walk down that path. And in the end, we are all accountable to natural law. That is the highest law, higher than the laws made by nations, states, corporations, or municipalities. We can trade pollution credits, could put cyanide in the water and pretend that Dilution is the solution. Isn't that the little quote of the EPA? You know? We can pretend all of those things, but in the end, you and I know that we are all accountable to the Creator and that natural law is the highest law. And if you pollute the water, you will drink it. If you pollute the air, you will breathe it. And if you arm everybody in the world, we will have a lot of violence. You know? That's the way it goes. So then we consider what to do. And there is no easy solutions. You know, I figure that in my little simple life, one of my friends, she told me, she said, you know, when I walk on that next world and I see my relatives, I'm going to say I tried. I figure that's a good enough start, you know, because each of us can only do what we can do as individuals. But do not underestimate, you know, your power as an individual, the wealth of your gifts that the Creator gave you. You know, I think about every change made in this country was made by individuals who struggled. My grandma was a member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, you know? Worked and struggled for a 40-hour work week, you know, and a decent wage. Our old people struggled for our land rights, our fishing rights, you know, just to keep our language. All of those rights, right to vote in this country, were struggles that were hard fought. And those are the struggles of individuals. I heard my friend John Trudell said once that the difference between a white person and an Indian is that white people, sometimes they feel powerless, but they don't feel oppressed. And Indians feel oppressed, but they don't feel powerless. I don't know if that's true. But what I do know is that I have this card I used to put under my pillow at night till about a week ago, and that card, I'll put it back under my pillow again. It was for the social change fairy. And you know, that's the sister of the tooth fairy, the social change fairy. And my little note to the social change fairy was I was hoping that George W. would find something really small to focus on. You know? And I had been kind of thinking like trade relations with Luxembourg would be good, you know? You know, that wouldn't like cause a lot of people a lot of pain. But you know what I realized, unfortunately, is there's no social change fairy. And the end change is made by us. But those old people told us that that change was possible. A long time ago, they said, Ji Missa Wab and Da Ming. They said that in this time here, this time of the seventh fire, that there's two paths ahead. And that was a choice upon which path we wanted to embark, but it was our choice. And then they said this word here, Ji Missa Wab and Da Ming. You know, they probably didn't have windows in the old days when they talked about that. But the concept was the same. You had to think positively about where we wanted to be and go about the process of being there. So that is our work at our community organizations and a lot of the community organizations that are in the hallway. The work of Indigenous Women's Network, the work of the Honor the Earth and the groups that we support, and the work of our hands and our hearts in our small communities, that work ahead. But it is good work, and it is a privilege to do. And I encourage you in your days ahead, in your time ahead, in that work and that path that you take. Thank you very much for your time.